Hey everyone, welcome to Professor Long's Lectures in Anatomy and Physiology. I'm Professor Bob Long. The video I'm about to do is the histology of our respiratory system. We only have a few slides to look at. Now, if you're enrolled in my class, I want you to learn what I write on the board and how I cover the information, as well as how it's listed in our list of things to know. If you're not in my class, your instructor may cover different slides, may be doing the material differently, may have additional information, or some information may be missing. Please cover the information the way your instructor wants you to cover it. This is not a substitute for whatever class you're enrolled in, okay? If you find it helpful, please hit like and or subscribe, but at least hit like. When I get enough likes, it lets me know my videos are working. I can continue to do them or at least upgrade them. If you're not aware, we're in the COVID shutdown, and so these videos are all being done sort of as a one-take shot with my cell phone. There's no editing or anything. These are pretty raw. But I'm planning on doing a better version of them in the future when time allows. Now, in order to get oriented so we know what we're looking at on this slide, I have the trachea model here. And you can see where the larynx and the trachea are, the respiratory tree here. If I were to cut through the trachea and stare down the tube, I would see from the epithelium lining the inside, as you know, all the surfaces of the body are lined with epithelium. Always and forever underneath the epithelium is a basement membrane, and almost always is a connective tissue. Well, this would be our epithelium because this is where air would be flowing. It's as if someone were lying like this, and I can see the tracheal cartilages here, which would be this piece. So there would be skin, some connective tissue, cartilage, connective tissue, and epithelium, and then the air would be flowing down the tube. I hope that gives you some perspective. Now, the way I like to look at this is there's several layers of tissue here. Each layer has a name, and then each layer is made up of a specific type of tissue. So I can ask the questions differently. So I'm going to try to label this for you so that you guys can make sense of it and practice for your lab tests. But if I look here, this entire layer, from where the air is passing, all of this layer right across here. If I ask you to identify the layer, this is what the layers' names are, okay? So I'm going to give you the names of the layers here. This layer is the respiratory epithelium. Okay? The next layer of tissue here would be called the lamina propria, which in Latin, lamina propria means proper layer. And then the next layer of tissue, let me get a marker that writes a little bit better, would be all of this layer here. And all of that layer is called the tracheal cartilages. So I really have three layers here: a respiratory epithelium, a lamina propria, and then the tracheal cartilage. Okay. Now, what kind of tissue is found in each layer? The respiratory epithelium is made up of pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar epithelial tissue. It's pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. There are cilia here, little membrane extensions sticking off that would be coated with mucus, and they push the mucus up, what we call the mucus escalator. We talk about that in lecture. And it looks like there's multiple layers of nuclei here, but if we had a strong enough and powerful enough microscope, you would see that every single cell is in touch with the basement membrane. So it's not simple, it's not stratified, it's pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelium. The lamina propria is it's basically some loose connective tissue. And that's really not something that we're going to ask about on this slide, but it's some loose connective tissue and some dense, irregular connective tissue. Not going to stress that too much. But the tracheal cartilage you should know. And the tracheal cartilage is made out of hyaline cartilage. So essentially, we don't tend to ask about the lamina propria on this slide, But there's essentially 4 questions, really 5 questions I could ask. What structure are you looking at? And you can say the trachea. The whole slide is the trachea. ID the layer, respiratory epithelium. ID this layer, tracheal cartilage. ID the tissue found in this layer, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. Identify the tissue found in this layer would be hyaline cartilage. Got it? Now, the next slide we're going to look at, I think, is just a close-up of the cartilage. So let me erase all my writing. We'll switch slides. And by the way, my camera is at a funky angle because our projector projecting onto the marker board provides a hot spot. You can see a glowing bright light, and I have to move the camera off to the side so that you don't see that hot spot. Okay. The next slide is just a real close-up of the tracheal cartilage, and you can see it's that hyaline cartilage with a very smooth matrix. Okay. The next slide we have is of healthy lung tissue. So the slide is the lung. Now, it's a little bit hard to imagine what I'm talking about, so I'm going to draw something on the board here, and then we'll look at the slide and it'll make sense. So imagine if I took a long piece of PVC pipe. You know, the hard plastic pipe that, you know, plumbing is made out of, okay? If I took some PVC pipe here and I cut holes in it, I made some openings in the pipe all the way around in 3 dimensions and all the way down its length. And somehow, some way, I could insert through the pipe and stick out and seal them off a bunch of little balloons. All the way down its length. If I capped it off and sticking out of the cap, I had little balloons all the way down the surface here. And they're going to be here as well. All the way around in all 3 dimensions. Now, if I blew air into this pipe, all the balloons would inflate. The pipe represents what we call the alveolar duct. Each balloon represents what we call an alveolus. And plural would be alveoli. We take the US off and put an I there. That would be more than one. The entire structure, the pipe, the tube with all of the balloons, and I mean all of them, the whole thing would be called an alveolar sac. And of course, if I took a whole bunch of these and stuck them together, then I would have a lung lobule. And if I took a bunch of those lobules, I would have the lobe of a lung. We talked about this when we went over another model. So, now imagine this. Imagine if I could take a sharp instrument and insert it and cut this tube in half all the way down its length. So now I'm looking at this tube, and I'm going to erase this and redraw it. But essentially what I'm looking at is this tube that has these little bubbles sticking off. Sometimes there's several stuck together. It's not going to be the prettiest drawing, but you get the idea. Okay? The tube is cut open. This is still the alveolar duct. And these are still the alveoli, and the whole thing is an alveolar sac. Well, that's exactly what we're looking at right here. This passageway would be the alveolar duct. If you look carefully, I have all these little bubbles or these little chambers like this. Each one of those would be the alveolus. And if I ask you for the entire collection of this, that would be the alveolar sac. So, ID the passageway, alveolar duct. ID the little C-shaped structures or chambers off to the side, alveolus. ID the entire structure, the tube with the sacs attached, or the tube with the chambers, and you would say alveolar sac. Okay? If I asked you what is this a slide of, you would say the lung. Now, while I have you here, I want you to stare at this picture as much as you can And look how vibrant and healthy and packed this is. And with all these little edges, look how much surface area there is. One of the things that we're not going to test you on, but you can see in here, if you look carefully enough, is occasionally there'll be these little spots where there's blood vessels. And there's actually blood vessels in the walls of these alveolar or alveoli, and those blood vessels are capillaries, and those capillaries will dump into these little arterioles and venules. And so as we breathe in air, it gets absorbed into our bloodstream and delivered to our tissues, and then the blood comes back out and we release the carbon dioxide. And so the greater the surface area, the more air can be exchanged. So if I have this amount of surface area to exchange air, if I put two hands together, or if I start to make my hand into little cups, I could fit more of them in the same space. So the more crumbled up, the more surface area, the more alveoli and alveolar sacs and ducts and things, the more surface area, the more gas exchange, the better for breathing. Now, if you look at this and you see how healthy and vibrant and full it is with all these alveoli, the next slide I'm going to show you is a slide of someone who has smoked cigarettes or something for a very long time. This is a cigarette smoker. Look at how loose and broken up all the alveoli are. And if you look carefully at the zoomed in version, you can see all of these little tar deposits. When people smoke cigarettes, there's tar that will coat the lungs. As the tar fills those alveoli, some white blood cells, called mesangial cells, and there's another name for them. Anyway, that's not Langerhans cells. But anyway, there's a white blood cell, a tissue macrophage that is going to cruise through the tissue, and anything that's damaged, they will start to eat away, and you lose surface area. You lose the ability to exchange gases. That's why people who are heavy chronic smokers, over years and years and years, they lose surface area of their lungs. They become very winded because they can't get rid of the carbon dioxide and get fresh oxygen to their tissue. So this would be the lungs of a smoker's lungs, someone who has emphysema, and you can see the tar deposits in there. Anyway, kind of interesting. One of the worst things, I have a very good friend who's a pulmonologist. That slide's not for us, not now. A very good friend of mine is a pulmonologist, and one of the things he told me is probably one of the worst things you could do to your body besides jumping off a 10-story building is to smoke cigarettes or what the inhaler thingies that people smoke. And anyone who smokes anything into their lungs, marijuana, cigarettes, anything else, you're really damaging the lungs. You're doing a lot of damage to them. No matter what anyone tells you about all those, hitters and bongs and everything else that people use. So smoking is not good for you in any way, shape, or form. Even if someone tells you that smoking certain, those electronic cigarettes and things are better for you, they're not. We just haven't figured out they haven't been around long enough for us to see the real damage. So don't. If you can, quit, because you're tearing up your lungs. It's not good for your body, amongst many other reasons not to do so. Anyway, that's my soapbox lecture for today. Listen, I hope you had as much fun as I did. I hope you learned something. Those are the slides for the respiratory system. Learn them, do them till you can't stand it. Do it till you understand it. Do it till you can teach it to someone else. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. Oh, man.